today we're going to make our signature scroll stamps, and you will need a piece of white cardstock or paper. I've got stuff on mine, but just a blank white cardstock paper, glue, an X-Acto knife, Sharpie, and scissors. What I've done on the cardstock or the white piece of paper is I have sketched out, and actually I did mine digitally. I created my signature, which is the letter K for my name, and I want the negative part of the letter to be what's going to print when I make my stamp. So that's the red area. So I printed it onto my paper, but you could also just draw it out with a pencil and a Sharpie. And these are some examples of the stamps that I did previously. So I printed out my stamp. You might want to play around with the size too. Another thing is you need your eraser, so don't forget to pull that out. And you want to make sure that whatever you've drawn or printed out is going to fit onto the eraser. So you don't want it to be too big. For example, this one would be too big for the eraser. So I played around with different sizes, and this is the size that I'm going to go with. So once I have that design finalized, I can cut that design out of the paper. And what you want to do is you want it to be reversed, because when it prints out, it's going to be the reverse. So if I were to cut this out on my stamp, when I stamp it, it's going to be the reverse of what I want. So I want to flip it over to the back, and I am just going to trace the same design on the back and then fill it in. Then I can glue that onto my eraser. And you can take a piece of paper towel or a blank piece of paper to make sure that it's pressed in all the way on the eraser and you don't get your fingers sticky that way. And you want to give at least an hour for the glue to dry. So I've already done that, and I have a sample here where it's already glued onto the eraser. And then I'm going to take my X-Acto, and this is where the cutting comes in. So you want to cut out the places where you want it to be receded or to be recessed. So if I want to print out the black areas, if I want that to come forward, then I want to cut out the white areas. So I'm going to start by cutting along the outline of the black areas with my X-Acto knife. And some rules with the X-Acto is you always want to try to have the blade away from your fingers, so you don't want your fingers right near the blade to prevent cutting yourself. So as best as you are able. And then you want to work in sections. So maybe I'm going to work with this white section at the top here of the letter K, and I'm just going to cut out a section at a time. And now I want to kind of angle my X-Acto to the bottom to cut through at the bottom here so that I can pull this whole section out. And you don't have to cut really deep, but just deep enough that the ink will not get onto, will not cover that area. Okay, so then I'm going to do the next. So this is the kind of border. So I'm going to dig underneath with my X-Acto at an angle and cut to the bottom of that. And so the nice thing about the rubber eraser is it's pretty easy to cut through. So now I have two sides, and I'm going to do the other side. And that may have been too big a chunk, so I can break that into two sections at a time. And now I'm going to do the fourth side. And let's do that in two sections as well. Now I want to do the actual letter K in sections. And then I'm going to just pull pieces off, and I can clean it up after I'm done here. So if you compare to the original, I should have four areas. The red areas are the areas that are raised up, and then the white areas are the areas that I've carved away. And you can peel off the cardstock when you're done. Now that I've peeled off the cardstock, I can see it better, and then I can clean it up more. So the last thing that I'm doing here is cutting off the excess eraser at the bottom and then on the top, because I don't want my ink to fill all that area. I just want it to be this square area. So I just made a line here at this top, and then you can see at the side, I'm going to use the full blade here to cut this whole section off. And just be very careful again that you don't have any fingers underneath the blade while you're doing that. And I'm going to cut all the way down. Make sure that you don't cut onto your tabletop or anything. You may want to have a pad underneath it. And then I'm just going to peel that off. And then go in on the other side and do the same thing. Again, with no fingers under the blade. And then I can go and clean it up some. And there's just one section that I want to clean up here so that I have a clean square line. And it doesn't have to be perfectly straight or perfectly clean because most of these chops have kind of irregular edges anyway. So this will probably be good enough so I can stamp it and see. When you're done with your X-Acto, make sure you put the lid back on and put it in a box or pencil case somewhere so that no little brothers or sisters get to it, or so you don't accidentally cut yourself. So we want to be really careful and safe with those knives. So here we've got our block now and we're ready to stamp it. So I'm going to get my stamp pad out. Traditional block stamps are always in red, so you just want to use the red. And then I'm going to press it hard down into my pad using both hands, and you want to do it, give it a few seconds, maybe count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Give it a big hard push. Alright, and there we've got it inked, and then I'm ready to stamp it onto my paper. So I'm going to flip this over so you can see it. And then same thing, push it down really hard. For at least 10 seconds again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Maybe count in Chinese to practice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And lift it up. And there you have, there's my K. And if you wanted it to be the reverse of that, with the actual K being red, you would have carved out the opposite. So remember that I carved out the red areas. Well, you could carve out the white area instead if you wanted the K to be red. So you can decide if you want it to be positive or negative. So there's my stamp, and then you can go and try it for yourself now. I just want to show you up close what the eraser block looks like so you can see more of the details where I carved out the red areas in my printout. So let's take a look at the original printout again. So I carved out the red areas. Of course, this is bigger than the one I put on there. And then let me grab the original eraser before it was carved. So here's the original design. Then here is when we put it and glued it onto the eraser. Here's what it looks like after it was carved out. And then here's how it looks when it's stamped. And so you can see there were a couple of areas I didn't carve out on the eraser. I can go back. They got the stamp on it, the ink, so I can go back and carve those areas out so that when I stamp it again, it won't show up here. And so on the eraser, you can see where the ink is, that area up here, and then down here. So I can just carve those out so it doesn't show up. I actually went back and just chopped off the top and bottom all together instead of carving it down. It might be easier too to go for a square look. So then once I inked this one on my stamp pad, my ink pad, I stamped it again and now it looks a lot cleaner. So here's the one before I cut those ends off. Then once I cut the ends off, I get a clean square. So it may be easier if you just cut those ends off all together. And make sure when you stamp it on your final artwork that you check to make sure that it's the right order, top and bottom, before you stamp it, or it might be upside down. When you're done carving, be sure to put that lid on it. Be safe with that blade. See you in the next class.